Shakespeare said all the world's a stage, and for Roger Simon of the Simon Studio, the stage has been in many different places all over the world, either in stage in terms of production, directing, acting, or on film as a filmmaker, a film star, or a director in terms of his own studios and helping coach prospective and promising actors. So joining me today is Hudson Valley View is Roger Simon, a very good friend.
Thanks, Nancy. Who is that guy?
Wonderful
Who
talent.
are you talking about? I'm still looking for work, though, you know. That doesn't stop.
We'll audition you right now.
I hope so.
Well, Raj, where did you start? You started in Scarsdale, not in Shakespeare, but Scarsdale.
I actually was born and raised in a little town in an island called Manhattan, and at 9 years of age, I moved to Scarsdale, New York, in Westchester. But the first part of my life, I was brought up in Manhattan, and my parents were both very much in the theater when they were younger, for the most part. My father was a fine artist. He was he did a number of things. He did all the posters for Mike Todd and George Abbott. They were all in Schubert Alley. He did a cartoon of every opening night on Broadway in the late 20s, early 30s. He would cover the opening nights much the way Hirschfeld did in the New York Times.
Right, I remember.
And he worked with a young journalist by the name of Walter Winchell, who used to do the byline for those cartoons. And so I grew up with it in my blood. And my grandmother used to take me to Broadway shows all the time when I grew up, and I saw all the great shows on Broadway. And so it was nothing special. This was part of life. And then when I was in high school, I had a great director, probably the best director I ever had. I always think about him, John Hemmerly. And our high school group at Scarsdale did the great plays. And so it was only natural that I kept going, and then Yale Drama School after Middlebury College.
Wow.
And after that, on to Europe and directing a lot in London, and then national theaters around Europe, and then doing stints in Iran and South Africa and India.
Wow.
All of those things. And I think, so it was sort of just, that's what life was for me as I started to develop as a young person.
And you've directed names like James Earl Jones, a number of different, well, very, very well-established and professional actors, as you yourself are. I
was very lucky that in the theater, I directed a lot of fine people, gentlemen like James Earl Jones and John Travolta when he was very young, James Woods,
wow.
Tova Feldshuh. These were all people that were in the theater. Many of people now say, oh, the movie stars. And I say, well, you might be interested to know that they spent a good 20-some years doing Shakespeare and classical and theater way before you saw them on a screen, and I worked with them in the theater. And I'm very proud of that. So this was just part of developing and growing up.
You know, it's an interesting time because that when you're looking at now, you certainly must be seeing a lot of, or anticipating a lot of changes that'll happen in probably this coming year because of change. But in the 1960s and 70s, you saw a lot of change at that time too, didn't you? There's a real difference in terms of.
Well, we all did. This was a very violent, very tumultuous time in all fields. Mm-hmm. In the theater, of course, we reflected that. So we would have plays that would be very political. Mostly plays that were political were written by writers like Sam Shepard and John Guare and Lanford Wilson and people. They weren't just political, but they were very much influenced by the politics of the time, and they were done in little theaters mostly, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, Cafe Chino, Cafe La Mama. Even at Yale Drama School, we were introduced to these people. Bob Brustein, Robert Brustein, the dean, would bring them up. And so this was very much a part of doing theater at the time, doing things with no sets, no costumes, often just with a work shirt and a pair of pants, and an audience being very involved with you in a way that you wouldn't get the same thing in a formal theater.
The 60s were certainly a time of real change. I mean, theater in many respects not only reflected what was going on, it was helping to kind of lead what was going on, wouldn't you say? I mean, there was a real difference in the type of subject matter that was going on in film when you went to the movies. There was a real sense of difference in terms of when you went to the stage. I mean, even how it was set up was changing. So in some respects, I wonder if we're not going through that again, those kind of changes in theater and television and certainly in film today.
I think so. I think certainly the theater in that time of the 60s was very political. And Europe and England looked to me to give politics to the theater. And within 10 years, they began to become more political than we were. In the 70s and 80s, they took over that.
Right.
Today, maybe we're going back now in this year, 2008, the economy being the way it is. One of the things that I did, I guess, coming out as a young director-actor was theater with nothing. We all had to, as we all started, the idea was very trendy then. The open theater, the living theater, to do theater on a bare stage, the way the Greeks did it originally,
Right.
was a revolution against big sets, big costumes,
Right.
loud productions, and the 60s were full of that.
Right, the method acting, changing the way that acting was
All
done.
of that.
It really was a real change, wasn't it?
It wasn't so much just, yes, the method acting, the character stuff, developing psychological stuff. There was a revolution against that, and it became almost cabaret in a political context. And today, without the money to support the arts the way we used to, we may be very much going back to that. And I'm not sure that's not a bad, I think that may be a very good thing to have to use your imagination again.
Right.
You know?
And participate, actually. Not just watch, but participate.
To be involved, that's right.
Let's, you know, when I look at what you've done in terms of the staging, because you have your studios, obviously, in New York, and up here you're doing
Yes,
production
we do.
as well.
Up here?
You have you're doing your look at the Amistad. The public theater is certainly one thing that I've worked with you on. The Amistad, the deciding vote. This is where you've taken. Let's talk about that. You take theater, actually put it in the context of the environment. You're not just having people come to the theater. You're really taking theater to them and putting it in context.
Well, Nancy, was very grateful that when we came here 5 years ago, you as mayor really encouraged a lot of things in the arts, and one of the things was putting an emphasis on the history of the whole area. And as you remember, when we started, you asked about this play called The Deciding Vote, whether I would look at it and direct it. And I said, oh boy, here's a PBS kind of stiff, you know, kind of academic piece. It turned out that you came up with something that I thought was really beautifully human about the Constitution, and that I had forgotten that it had been ratified right here in Poughkeepsie. And so, yes, we started to look at it in terms of not just the play and the history of the play, but reflecting it in the actual location area. And so instead of doing it in a theater, we actually did it on the actual site where the Constitution was ratified, which happened to be the courthouse on Market Street. And that was very exciting for all of us. And you also, we together put it together with, which I'd never done, political people from the area. I joked to Al Rosenblatt, who at that time was the Court of Appeals judge. I said to him, you know, Al, I don't think I've done professional theater, and I've done one or two community theater plays, but I don't think I ever worked with actors who did it for civic duty, you know. And this was like a pageant, a city pageant.
Oh, it really was.
Really
they were just, I mean, all walks of life. Chamber of Commerce, Charlie North, you know, Judge Rosenblatt. I mean,
Steve
Wing,
Wing,
Corporate
right?
Counsel. They were really having fun and engaging that again. And I think the same thing.
Nancy Cozean, I think, was in it. I think
that was.
I called your agent. I remember. Yes.
I got to be Melanchthon Smith, one of my favorite guys.
Yeah.
But the Amistad was another such case, and that one, it was very interesting. I think taking a look at the open air and using the actual Amistad, who visited here for the first time, and to actually incorporate that ship as part of another of another play, and that was on the Amistad. That was what the Freedom.
Land of the Free.
Land of the Free.